the Ontario Regional Chief. And we're here today to talk about a very important matter to our communities. I'm joined with members of our Leadership Council, members of our community as well are here in the gap, members of our youth as well. I want to acknowledge the territory in which we are on today and the important issue that we're going to be talking about this morning, and reiterating our position of our communities here in the region of Ontario. Today we're talking about Bill 5, Protecting Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act, which was introduced by this government over a month ago. Today I made our stance to the Standing Committee very clear that the current status of this bill and the process underway to enact this bill is not going to work for First Nations, not going to work for our communities in this region. The process and the honour that the Crown has is being failed. My colleagues here today will help demonstrate that. I want to be clear, though. Our communities in this region do not oppose development. Our communities in this region want prosperity. Our communities in this region want to create jobs and want to form partnerships with industry, with government. But these opportunities must be built upon respect. There also must be a recognition of the inherent treaty rights, the jurisdiction and obligation that our communities have to all creation, to the waters, to the lands. These are sacred teachings that we have, but also as treaty partners. I remind all Ontarians, the Government of Ontario, including the Government of Canada, is that treaties were entered into with First Nation communities, and our communities have continued to uphold their obligation under the treaty. The one who has not is government. And today we're here to talk about Bill 5 and the processes that are underway, and the overarching change of legislation that my colleagues will demonstrate will have detrimental impacts to our communities in which we represent, have detrimental impacts to prosperity, also have detrimental impacts to our relationship, and bringing about opportunity. The path that's underway now under this legislation is the wrong way. It's a path that will lead to difficult times. It's a path that will undermine the rights of our community, the stewardship that our communities have. And it's a path that we know, we have seen time and time again when government brings about legislation that will lead to disparity, that will lead to confrontation, potential confrontation on the ground, but also will lead to the loss of opportunity. And again, I want to reiterate, we don't oppose development, but we want to bring development in a respectful way, understanding and the spirit intent of the treaties that was signed between the government and our people. Bill 5 in its current state will only bring about difficulty. There are many risks in this legislation. However, we will go into more detail today. We've provided some detail this morning to the committee. An extreme pressing concern in this matter is legislation is the changes proposed to the treatment of archaeological sites and sacred cultural items. And we know that there are many sacred sites that our people don't make known. There's a reason why they're not registries. There's a reason why they're not part of burials registered on the burial grounds. Because there are sacred sites that our people have been placed in. And we have seen time and time again when they have been disrespected. Most recently in Red Rock, we've seen a situation where our ancestors were disturbed. Proponents didn't care about it. And that's under existing legislation. To think that changing legislation in broad, that these will be disregarded and what that impact will have, it'll have a detrimental impact to our people. So finding archaeological and burial sites and repatriating sacred items are examples. There's a lot of good examples of how we have worked together. Our communities have worked together through processes built upon respect and processes where the proponents, where government understands First Nations positions and understand why it's important that we protect the waters, and understand why it's important that we protect the breeding grounds for our animals, the waters that are so sacred to us. Archaeological requirements is not red tape. There's a good reason for them. And to protect these sites, we must be all aware. And so Bill 5 will bring about so many changes that will make it much more difficult for our people on the ground, and will make it difficult for prosperity. It will make it difficult for our relationship to stand together and defend the jurisdiction and sovereignty of Canada as a whole. If anybody understands jurisdiction and sovereignty, it's First Nations people, the first peoples of the land, that have a sacred obligation to uphold. And today we're here to talk about that. So I'll now invite Grand Chief Fiddler to say a few words.
Morning, everybody. My name is Alvin Fiddler. I'm the Grand Chief for Nishnawbe Aski Nation. We were here just a few days ago, last week. The 49 chiefs of Nishnawbe Aski Nation, along with the Women's Council, the Youth Council, the Elders Council, met here in Toronto at one of the hotels. And before we came to Toronto, we had sent, and I had handwritten, I can write, still with a pen, to Premier Doug Ford to personally invite him to our assembly, because I knew that it was going to be an important gathering for our leadership and for our nation. But he chose not to respond. And then it was the day before I received a text message from one of his ministers asking me if they can come and crash our meeting. And that is just so inappropriate. And there are so many things that are inappropriate about the way they're going about with this piece of legislation. And our leaders, when they were here last week, along with our women leaders and our youth leaders, delivered a clear and a strong message. And they passed a motion that morning before we came here, a resolution stating their opposition, that they oppose this bill in its entirety. And we can make that resolution available to you for you to reference. And I hope that the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is watching, or his ministers are watching this, because we're hearing that they are contemplating drafting or creating similar piece of legislation like Bill 5. And this is not how you want to start your mandate as Prime Minister. That you need to be respectful of our nation. You need to be mindful of the obligations that you have under a treaty. And that was another message that was delivered by our leadership last week. To uphold and honor our treaties. And that's why I'm back here again this week, to deliver the same message. And even if, when this bill becomes law, that this will not be the end of our fight, that the fight will just start, will only begin. Because we know that our young people from the Nan Territory are watching this very closely. And they're worried, they're rightfully worried about what this could mean for them and for their future. And I know that they are prepared to take action. And that is something that Doug Ford needs to be aware of. And I just want to just close off by quoting you a letter. As some of our young people have already written letters. They sent a letter to our MPP, Sol Mamako, who's here in the room with us, a grade 8 class from Pekanscom First Nation. And there's a bunch of students here with their quotes and what they said. But the last one I'll read to you. It's from a student, KQ, his initial, I think that's Quill. And he says, after reading the articles about Bill 5, it made me feel a bit concerned, and I got chills because of how it talked about nature and how the government would be putting it in danger. The environment is slowly dying because of these kinds of things that are going on around the world. It's not good for the earth, and it's messed up. In conclusion, we do not support Bill 5. And also, do not like how Doug Ford has been trying to push Bill 5 through the House. Please ask Doug Ford and the House to reconsider, because these actions are not fair and not in good faith with First Nation communities. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Grand Chief Fiddler, for that. And now I think that the reflection that the youth has provided from one of the NAN communities is appropriate, that we invite our youth that we brought today to provide some reflections.
I just want to say miigwech for having me here today, and for the words of Grand Chief and ORC. Ani Kinawea, Nori no Sikla Indigenous, Migaza Dodem, and Bajwanung Nadonjaba, Nishnawbe Kwe and Dao. My name is Hanna Sewell, and I'm speaking today as the co-chair of the Ontario's First Nations Young People's Council, and also as a proud member of Batchewana First Nation. I'm also an older sister, I'm a hunter, I'm a fisher, and I'm a nurse. And I'm an Ojibwe woman who's proud of the roots where she comes from. I'm just as proud as the 133 First Nations in Ontario is. I'm here today with a deep sense of responsibility to our communities, for our health, our homelands, and our most sacred sites across Ontario. Bill 5 doesn't protect Ontario. It protects corporate interests and short-term profits at the expense of our future generations, the air we breathe, and the water we drink. Bill 5 is an omnibus bill that guts foundational laws, some older than I am, and replaces a multi-ministry approval process with that's oversight with rushed one-step approval process. These laws are not above the legal duty to consult First Nations. We must be involved in the decisions that affect our lands, our water, and our way of life. Laws should never be rewritten to prioritize economic growth during a climate crisis. This bill is a liability to our province of Ontario. The bill is an attack on First Nations responsibilities. It undermines First Nation sovereignty, our Nanaknagewan. It disregards our role as stewards of the land and violates the spirit and intent of our treaty relationships. By gutting these protections and by removing recovery strategies, progress tracking, management plans, and the government is actively weakening environmental protections. This not only threatens First Nations, but all Ontarians. The Crown's legal and moral duty is not to corporations, but it is to the people, and it is to the treaty partners. Development and appropriate infrastructure for the North can be done with consideration, logic, effort, and a lead by First Nations people. Too often, youth are excluded from these conversations, but we are the ones who will live with the consequences. As First Nations youth leader and a nurse, I see how our physical and mental health are linked directly to the land. When the land is sick, so are we. This bill is a direct threat to our socioeconomic determinants of health, to climate justice, and the integrity of our nation-to-nation relationships we are meant to be equal partners in. We are in a climate crisis and a mental health crisis, and now we are being told we have 30 days to respond to legislation that could reshape Ontario. This is not consultation, this is exclusion. Yet First Nations youth are rising across the province, as mentioned, and we are here to step up to protect our lands, our languages, and assert our inherent rights. When First Nations defend the land, we are also protecting our non-Indigenous kin. This is about all of us. And as much as Canada and the province are allowed to reside on these lands, we continue to remind our treaty partners that this land is not a commodity. It is a relative, and we all have sacred and shared responsibilities to protect it. Our responsibilities as First Nations youth are not optional to us. They are inherently sacred, and we are taught to think 7 generations ahead, not only just in terms of our election or an unethical and quick profit. To continue raising awareness, the Ontario's First Nations Young People Council is launching a social media campaign to share what the land means to us through artistic expression and how Bill 5 threatens our youth, our land, and our future. Ontario's First Nations Young People Council urge the Ontario government to listen to First Nations youth, withdraw this bill, and honor your treaty obligations. I would like to leave us with words of hope. In our recent federal election, Canadians and First Nations stood together for a different vision of this country. Prime Minister Carney recently said during a conversation with our southern neighbours, "I've spoken with the owners of Canada and we aren't for sale." We hope that Premier Ford can listen and follow that example and understand the stewards of Ontario have spoken. Ontario is not open for business. Ontario is not yours to discover. It is First Nation land. Kill the bill. Miigwech.
Miigwech to our youth and the reflection on today's on the bill that's being put forward and the impacts that it'll have in so many to our youth, to our communities and prosperity. So I'll now invite Grand Chief Abram to provide some remarks.
Sagoli sagwegi de wadlag ini yung gets otayuni ne wigita lodo kala onya da aga ne waga honjod. Grand Chief Joel Abram, Grand Chief at Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians, and just have a few. I'm not going to, go over. I think a lot of what's we don't like about the bill has already been said in terms of possibly violating our rights. And but even if the government puts in a non-derogation clause, even if they say they're going to consult with First Nations, that doesn't undo the environmental harms that could possibly be done if this bill passes the way that it is right now. There's an old treaty called the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, made between the Nishnawbe and Haudenosaunee and other nations. And not only was it a treaty about sharing the resources of the land, if you can envision a dish, and then one spoon, no knives, no sharp objects, so they wouldn't cut each other, and they would share those resources of the land. It was not only an agreement to share the land, it was also a covenant with nature itself in order to preserve that for future generations. And so that's why we always have to have that 7 generations aspect of looking after the environment in our lands, and not just the next 7 quarters. For what good is a dollar if your grandchildren won't be able to breathe the air or drink the water? And so we urge, Premier and his government to withdraw this bill, stop the environmental rollbacks, because if you're trying to copy what Americans are doing, that's a race to the bottom, not to the top, especially when it comes to our heritage, our natural heritage, which I think most Ontarians really value, besides we do too. So, I think in terms of substance, we do appreciate, and I have to acknowledge the investments that the government has made in terms of economic development. The Ministry of Indigenous Affairs was changed to IAFNR to also include First Nations economic reconciliation, and I think that's important. And if there's a goodie bag of investments, we're going to take that, but that doesn't mean we're going to sit in a corner and turn a blind eye to things when we don't think that they're right. We're still going to speak up to our rights and to the rights of the environment, and any kind of damage, we want to present those kind of things. So this bill violates the spirit of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. It prioritizes extraction over protection. It strips away checks and balances, and it undermines the very laws and responsibilities we could carry forward from our ancestors. And again, that $3 billion loan fund in the provincial budget, if it's intended to buy silence, I'll say what many of us are thinking. We'll take the investment and still speak our truths, because our rights are not for sale. Economic reconciliation without legal and moral accountability is just another form of coercion. So I guess my closing message is that you can't divide us, and respect means coming to the table openly with transparency and full recognition of our nation's rights, responsibilities, and laws. And to our people, we're standing together, shoulder to shoulder, in defense of our sovereignty, our lands, and your future generations.
We'll go Grand Chief. I'll now invite Chief Shelly Moore-Frappier, Temagami Chief.
Kwekwe. I'm Shelly Moore-Frappier. I'm the Chief of Temagami First Nation, which is located on Bear Island in Lake Temagami. We are the inherent right holders of over 10,000 square kilometers in the Temagami bioregion. We are the Indigenous nation. 7,000 years in our homeland as a distinct people is the source of our inherent rights. Only we have those rights. This is the right recognized by the Crown and our treaties that are protected by the Constitution Act of 1982. First Nations' responsibility is to the lands. It's to the animals, it's to the waters, and all beings within our homelands. And we take this responsibility very seriously. It's real. Whether you understand and appreciate our sacred responsibility is irrelevant. It exists, and it has existed since time immemorial. It is how we have maintained our nationhood and our territorial imperatives over millennia. We are still here with our rights and sacred responsibilities intact, and we are not going anywhere. Bill 5 poses a direct threat to those sacred responsibilities. Mining is about strangers with no attachment to our lands and waters, removing pieces of our territories for economic gain. Often those profits rarely come back to the places from which they were derived. This is pure colonialism. Bill 5 aims to streamline a process which is already an impossible burden to our nations. We already face a deluge of mining and staking claims across our territories, which we simply can't keep up. We don't have the capacity, expertise, or the resources to meaningfully engage with proponents when they want to take pieces of our territory and turn it into profit. There are roughly 12,000 mining and staking claims in my homeland alone. We have one staff member to deal with all of them. They would have to review 38 every single day for a year without taking a day off to get through them. This is untenable. Rather than addressing the systemic imbalance, Bill 5 proposes to streamline an already broken system, making it even harder for nations like ours to engage. Last year, First Nations called on a one-year moratorium on the mining lands administration system so that we could assess its impacts and the claims in our territories. This would have protected First Nations rights and territories, but it never materialized. Now the province says it's going to protect the mining industry from China by empowering the minister to suspend the system and deny certain individuals from being able to hold mining authorizations in the province. Why are the mining sector's interests being protected over First Nations? We are concerned that this power will be used against First Nations who hold claims on their territories in a bid to slow or stop development. Our responsibilities to our lands and waters and all of our relatives were given to us by the Creator. Nothing gives the minister the power to quash and usurp them with the stroke of a pen. As you probably know, there is ongoing litigation between First Nations and the province over mining in this province. The changes proposed to the Mining Act will only risk further litigation. I believe the government knows this. They've tried to preempt potential litigation by effectively banning people from suing them. Ontario is narrowing in on an authoritarian rule. Ontario cannot supersede the honour of the Crown or its treaties. The bill does not mention the consultation process with First Nations. The government has said it will uphold the Crown's legal duty to consult, but we've seen these legal obligations ignored time and time again. If First Nations are not involved in making decisions, not respected or taken seriously, it's safe to assume many will object and developments will stall and get tied up in court. We're not against development per se. We recognize that we must move forward together. But that doesn't mean we'll stand by while our lands and rights are steamrolled by a short-sighted desire for profit and prestige. Let us not forget, Temagami First Nation has been engaged in a legal fight for the recognition of our rights since long before Bill 5. The Bear Island case in 1991 is still unresolved in many ways. We're still waiting for justice, for recognition, and for a fair process. And now, with Bill 5, the government moves at lightning speed when it suits industry, but drags its feet when it comes to honoring its obligation to First Nations. The government says these changes will reduce litigation, but instead of addressing our concerns, it's attempting to preempt lawsuits by stripping away our rights to challenge unjust laws. That is not justice, that is betrayal of the honor of the Crown, which is supposed to guide all dealings between the government and Indigenous nations. The bill is silent on the Crown's legal duty to consult. We are told this duty will be respected, but we've been told that before. Time and again, we've seen our voices ignored, our rights sidelined, and our lands put at risk. If First Nations are not at the decision-making table, then don't be surprised when development stalls, projects are opposed, and the courts are forced to intervene. If this government is serious about prosperity, then it must also be serious about reconciliation, fiduciary responsibility, and shared decision-making. Because if they think they can legislate over us without consequence, they are about to learn what happens when a nation has nothing left to lose and everything to defend. So we are organized and we are united, and we are prepared to escalate this fight through every political, legal, and diplomatic avenue necessary. Miigwech.
Good morning. My name is Linda Debassige. I'm the Grand Council Chief for the Anishinabek Nation. The Anishinabek Nation is the oldest political organization in Ontario, with roots that extend far beyond the formation of Canada or the province. We are an advocacy and support body for 39 First Nations in Ontario, with all of them being directly impacted by the bill. While I completely support and reiterate what my colleagues have shared today, I can't reiterate enough that Bill 5 significantly increases the chances of conflict with all of our nations in Ontario. The Anishinabek nations, First Nations, stand with our brothers and sisters to the north of us, to the east to us, to the west and to the south. I've been asked today to, do the closing on behalf of our team here, the Leadership Council, and our youth. And while the Anishinabek Nation will produce an official statement as it relates to this particular conference, the press conference, I just want to say in closing that Ontario is trying to legislate us out of the conversation. That won't work. First Nations have always protected these lands, and we will continue to do so. We've said it before, and we'll say it again. First Nations will fight back. We will not stand by while our rights are ignored, our lands are targeted, and our treaties are not upheld. The Crown must honor its obligations or face the consequences of continuing to violate them. Withdraw Bill 5. There is no path forward with this legislation in its current form. Repeal it, start again, work with us, with our First Nations, with our treaty nations, with our Aboriginal title nations, so that we can create something that will allow us to ensure not only that our economy survive, but our environment, our lands, our waters, our animals are here for our great-great-great-grandchildren, those of whom we will never meet, but we are responsible for them today. As an Anishinaabe woman, it is not lost on me that it is our women who have historically gave direction and sent out our warriors to what is necessary. And I know they are listening today. With that said, I caution the government, similar as how I've stated through testimony earlier last week and through our formal submissions, that should this bill proceed in its current form, we will be idle no more. Miigwech.
Good for that. Don't know, do we have some time for some questions?
Actually, I have a question for Grand Chief Fiddler. You mentioned hearing something about the federal government potentially pursuing a similar legislation. Is that what you've heard? Similar to the one window, one project part of this bill, or the special economic zones part of this bill, or something altogether?
Yeah, I think there's been some indications already from the federal government that they're looking at a similar type of piece of legislation, and it's not surprising. You know what we've just gone through with the provincial election and then the federal election that's just happened, where Doug Ford seemed to be quite friendly with Mark Carney, and you have to believe that they came to some sort of an understanding how they plan to work together when it comes to resource development, especially in the north, especially when it comes to the Ring of Fire. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing and hearing more and more in the days ahead.
Chief Benedict, the Premier this morning characterized those that oppose the bill as radical environmentalists. Could you respond to that?
Well, I think that protecting all beings, the waters, the lands, sacred teachings that we have, if that's what we're classified as environmentalists, I'm not sure that we're completely radical on that, but it's more of an obligation that we have. It's an obligation that our people have to the lands, to the water, to keeping the resources for the next 7 generations. And I think that every leader that has spoken today, including our youth, has talked about how important that is. And so I don't know that a classification of radical environmentalists is appropriate, but more so of those who have a sacred obligation to protect everything that's needed to continue to exist as people.
I would just add to that for someone like Doug Ford, who is prepared to do away with everything, there are obligations under NDRIP, there are obligations under the treaty. To call us radical is just absurd. I would call him a radical colonizer for the way he's prepared to just run with his tractor up north and doing away with all the obligations that he and his government has.
In the back here.
I couldn't help but notice the sign and the echo of Doug Ford's "Canada is not for sale" sign. Is that deliberate? Could you talk a little bit about the message that you're trying to say with "Our rights are not for sale"?
Oh, with the banner up front, you mean? Was I wearing something? Absolutely. This is our lands, the first people of the lands. And the lands that we have, and the treaties that were signed, and the understandings that were done with our people and the Crown was not forever, was not relinquishing. It was an understanding of how we'll continue to coexist. And so for, the tagline to say it's not for sale, transactions with our people were done, and it wasn't a sales transaction. And so this First Nation land is not for sale.
If I could just follow up, just in these last 2 election campaigns and with the stuff going on with the U.S., there's been a lot of this general push among the governments to get projects approved faster, the whole stated purpose of Bill 5. How do you feel they are using that to try to get Bill 5 through, like the justification?
Well, I think that, the disparity in communities is great. The overcrowding, not enough homes, inadequate homes, unclean drinking water. If there's anybody that understands why there's a sense of urgency, it's our people. And so to classify that, we need to, extract these resources right away, our people understand urgency. But it's how it's done in the process. And the government needs to come to the table, have respectful conversations that are built upon the honor that they have. Government doesn't choose when they should be honorable or not. By forming government, it comes with the obligations that government carries. And that's to be honorable to the relationship that they have with First Nations people. And so we want prosperity. We want jobs. We want to bring about economies to our communities. But it's sitting down at the table with the rights holder, the 133 First Nations that are in Ontario, and having those constructive conversations. Because legislating colonial legislation of how it's going to be, how government says this is going to happen, we've seen since contact. Could
I ask you about the meeting you had with the Premier and I believe Minister Rickford? They talked on Thursday about changing the preamble. I haven't seen what the preamble has been, what they're talking about. Can you tell us about what happened at that meeting and what did you get out of it?
So the Chiefs of Ontario wrote the Premier, wrote the ministers responsible about our concerns. And those concerns have been laid out in many of the testimonies today and in the testimonies that's happened in committee. And so the Chiefs of Ontario advocates for the communities in this region, but the Chiefs of Ontario is not a rights holder, nor are we a one-stop shop for consultation. And so the meeting with the Premier was about talking about how we can continue to work together as a government and the Chiefs of Ontario, but was not specifically about Bill 5. Bill 5 came up, and I reiterated our position is that consultation is to be done with the communities, not the Chiefs of Ontario, and that the current status of Bill 5, in which we've articulated here today, is unacceptable. It infringes upon the rights, the jurisdiction, and sovereignty of the communities in this region. And that was essentially what the message was communicated to the Premier.
But it is true that they then said something about changing the preamble, and they said that to us afterward. Did that...
There was no request to change the preamble. There was no request to change the preamble, and frankly, the preamble helps guide interpretation, but it's not binding.
It didn't work because you spoke at the committee.
And so if there's any consent to any changes, it's with the rights holders. It's not with the Chiefs of Ontario. It's not with the Ontario Regional Chief. It's through the processes that the 133 First Nations in this region determine appropriate of what that level of consultation will be. And I've articulated that today in committee, that every community in this region determines that level of consultation and what that looks like.
Any idea why though they would meet with you, but not with, say, Grand Chief Fiddler, also extended an invitation?
Well, we've asked for the Premier to meet with the leadership because those are the ones that carry the voice of the people. I work for the Chiefs. The Chiefs work for the people. And it's the people that are impacted. It's the communities, the jurisdiction of community that's impacted. That's who the government needs to be meeting with. That's who the government needs to be having those constructive conversations with. And everything that we have seen today and articulated to the process is unacceptable.
Did the Premier or Minister Rickford signal that they would be open to amendments on Bill 5?
There was no discussion of amendments. There was discussion about what I reiterated just now, is that there needs to be conversations, meetings with rights holders, with the community leadership, and the leadership will decide what that level of consultation looks like.
Are there any amendments, especially to the special economic zone section of this bill, that would satisfy your concerns, or does that whole section gotta go?
Well, I think that based on everything that we've heard this morning, based on last week's testimony, based on this morning's testimony, nobody has said change this and it's okay. I think it's pretty clear that the bill is overarching and it infringes upon the rights, the obligations of the Crown and of our people. And so to think that amendments can be made, I haven't heard that from any of our leadership.
I just want to add to that, in conversations with the First Nations within the Anishinabek Nation, and of course what we've always said since time immemorial in relation to treaty, the government has to uphold the honor of the Crown, and in doing so must consult directly with our treaty nations, our Aboriginal title nations, and through that process, perhaps co-developed frameworks may be a potential to look at that nation-to-nation relationship and embed that in the existing legislation. The legislation in its current form completely disregards the original relationship our First Nations have had with the Crown since time immemorial. And we are done with allowing these types of legislation to continue without our First Nations free, prior, and informed consent.
We're talking about Bill 5, but I recall you expressed, a lot of you expressed these concerns about Bill 23, for example, and the absence of duty to consultation in that bill, and several others since. I have two-part questions. One, have you been consulted since Bill 23 after expressing those concerns by this government, by any member of this government? And two, what is it about this bill that has brought you all together compared to the past bills that have come from this government as well?
Well, on 23 specifically, those again, the consultation needs to occur with communities directly. And so it's not the Chiefs of Ontario, it's not the Ontario Region Chief, it's with communities directly. And so, and I think that based on, what Grand Council Chief Debassige has said as well, I mean, these conversations need to be happening around respect, built upon respect, mutual respect, and under common interests. And this is broadly legislating. Again, how I said earlier, how it's going to be is not going to get us anywhere, right? And so what has brought us together is that this piece of legislation, which is an omnibus bill, changes so many pieces of legislation that will be detrimental, undermine the jurisdiction of community, and as you've heard from a number of our leaders here today, will on the ground create a lot of issues. And so the design of it from the government's perspective is that we want to get things done faster. This will not speed it up. We will lose opportunities. We will have confrontation. The relationship between our First Nations and the government will be strained by this. And this is why we are here today, to share that information. We are not against prosperity. We're not against jobs. We're not against creating a stronger economy. But it has to be done in a respectful way, not in an arbitrary way that the colonial governments have been doing since contact. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is all the time we have today. So thank you so very much for joining us this morning, and I appreciate all the advocacy and support that we have in the room. Miigwech.